off.
We're back with 45 minutes of crap.
45 minutes. Yeah, just buckle up. No, we got a review on YouTube from somebody the other day. Ilana and I were together in New York. We were actually in the same bed in our PJs trying to wind down for the night. And we checked our email and it was like, this is 45 minutes of crap just to get to 5 minutes. Something good. So thank you. Shout out to that person for making our night. It was actually a really long review. And so I read it to Ilana as a bedtime story.
I fell right to sleep. You can't hurt me.
Yeah. They were kind of mean to Ilana too, specifically because it was like an Ilana solo episode. I want to point that out so people know that I'm not part of the 45 minutes of crap.
Thank you for clarifying. I don't have issues about myself and my self-worth, so that really helps.
No,
we're good. I'm kidding.
I'm only bantering about it because it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, but regardless, we're really excited because today we don't have a crappy guest. I'll
No,
be as quiet as
well,
I
we
can.
didn't have a crappy guest the last time either.
Oh right, I was the crappy guest.
Yeah,
I
no,
was
they
the
were mad.
crappy host.
They were mad because you were talking and
Right.
sharing things about your experiences, which you should never do on your own podcast.
Absolutely not. I will refrain.
Everyone
from-
knows that.
I won't even talk this whole episode. I'll mute
They taught us
myself.
that first thing in podcast school. They were like, never say anything about your own experiences. Just listen to what the guest has to say, move it
Exactly.
along. So that's
But
what we're
I'm
going to do here
excited.
today.
I'm really excited because when we had this idea for a podcast, Katie and I were like, what should we do about this podcast art? And we immediately said we shouldn't do it ourselves. That's
No.
for sure.
We're
Even as-
artists.
Yeah.
We do lettering. Why would we ever do our own? No.
Yeah.
If you've ever tried to do your own logo or something, you know the plights. You don't want to do your own.
Yeah. And that's who today's guest is. You want to introduce yourself?
Well, yeah, we reached
your
out
own-
to this specific guest to help us do the podcast art. So the art that you're probably staring at lovingly right now on your phone screen is made by this person.
Choice. But my name is Matthijs Herzberg, or you can say Matthijs Herzberg, although I will not make any concessions on the first name part. That is Matthijs. Don't go by Matt or Matthew. It's the Dutch version of Matthew. I moved to New Orleans about 10 years ago for love. I had been traveling around the world after I finished high school, and I met a woman here whose name is also Katie. And, well, now we're married.
Yeah, go Katie's. Katie's are hot.
We're, in fact, about to have a baby girl this June, so...
What? Oh my
properly
gosh.
laying our roots down in this country.
Congratulations.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So
We're very
excited.
excited. We just got
A
another
baby
birthday
Herzberg.
yesterday. Yeah.
Did I say
I'm
that
not gonna
properly?
get the first name yet, but it does go with Herzberg really well.
Oh,
You'll find out.
I'm excited.
So am I. I'm really excited. We just got another ultrasound yesterday. We got to see her little face. Oh, I can show you.
Let's see your little face.
Hanging right above my desk.
That's a
Yeah.
human. It's a human and your wife. How weird and cool.
Right up a little person right in her belly. Just-
Is your wife a
Thinking
creative
about-
or your partner creative as well?
She is, yeah. She's an artist. She went to school for painting, but she
Amazing.
doesn't do a lot of painting anymore these days.
No, because your wife did the color palettes exploration for us
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
Typecast logo.
That's right.
She's
She
like
has
your
the
1-2 punch. She's the two.
Better eye for color than I do, for sure.
When you delivered those, you were like, I just have a couple colorways. There was like 800 colorways.
Yeah.
It was like above and beyond. We loved it.
Yeah, no, she did a great job of that. Well, one thing she does is she makes these epoxy charms with king cake babies in them. King cake babies are little plastic babies that get put in a king cake. A king cake is a specific type of cake that gets eaten in New Orleans or southern Louisiana around Mardi Gras season. It's a tradition that was brought over from France, I believe. Anyway, so they're very specific to New Orleans. She makes these epoxy charms with them. That
And you're a super fan of all things Mardi Gras, yes?
Yes, I am a...
Tell us about your Mardi Gras life. What does it mean to you, and like, what do you do during Mardi Gras?
Well, so it's a season, right? It's not just a day. It is also a day, but it is also a season. Mardi Gras is Fat Tuesday, which is a different date every year, but somewhere around February, March. And then in the 6 to 8 weeks prior are all these parades and festivities and parties. And it gets more and more intense. The parades get bigger and more frequent as it builds up to the big day of Mardi Gras itself. So I try to see as much of that as I can. My favorite part of it is probably the more handmade, crafty parades that have a lot in my neighborhood, the Marigny Bywater.
Ooh,
which
yeah.
has it feels more folksy. It's really people just making their own costumes and going out into the streets and having their own parades and such. And then there's the giant uptown parades, which feel a little more commercial. They're a lot of fun as well. But they have these giant floats pulled by tractors, and there's people on them throwing absolute shit ton of beads. Pardon my language. So many beads, in fact, that they like clog up the drains around the city. And if you walk down St. Charles Avenue, any time of year, you can see all the Mardi Gras beads hanging in the oak trees. The color kind of fades from them. But anyway.
Were you a Mardi Gras fan before you came to New Orleans? Or is this like a thing that you adopted once you came?
We do have Carnival in the Netherlands, but I never went. It's in the south of the country, which is the Catholic part. I grew up in the north, which is Protestant, and it was never really sold to me. I guess I never really understood it, and I never got to witness it as a kid. So I really only saw it for the first time when I came to New Orleans. My first time in New Orleans, it happened to be Mardi Gras season, so I got to witness it all.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And you were like, oh, crap, what is this?
Yeah. It truly is a folk festival, and that there is no organizing agency that organizes the Mardi Gras. It just, people do it from the ground up. It bubbles from the streets.
Literally.
Arranges some permits, make sure that there's a motorcycle escort for the large parades. And
I didn't know that. I always thought it was like I don't know. It's really community based, like by the people in the community. That's amazing. That's one of the things I'd like to see one day because it sounds really impressive. But also I think I would probably have a panic attack in the middle of it because it's like a huge crowd and probably not my favorite thing to do.
It can be, but you can get away from the crowds. Because, unlike a regular festival, you're not confined to a certain area. So if the crowd gets too big, you move over a street or two.
Well, I'm glad this is turning into a Mardi Gras episode. That sounds like a lot of fun. But I am curious, especially with, you've traveled the world and now you're settled somewhere completely different to where you were raised. Can you share a little bit about how you even started with because type design is pretty freaking wow.
Pacific.
Pacific. It's really specific. It's really niche. It's not like a elective most people can take in college or anything like that. Definitely not something people learned in high school. How did you get started?
Yeah, no, that's true. I also don't think I would have ever imagined myself doing this. When I was younger, younger as in like teenager, I was big into two things, drawing and architecture. And didn't really know anything about lettering, but I kind of got into this classic Americana style tattoo illustration when I was 17-ish, 18. And part of that is a certain type of very simple lettering, kind of just plain outlines, monoline lettering, a little bit ornamental. And I just tried to figure out how to do that nicely. And I was like, this is really fun. Like, this is probably my favorite part of drawing this heart tattoo that says I love mom, is drawing the I love mom part. And that got me looking at the type around me. And at this point, I think I was traveling around the US when I first really started paying attention to letters and just realizing like, wow, there's all these different kinds of fonts. Why does this one look like that and this one look like that? They're all so weird and they're all so cool. Trying to imitate them and everything. And then I met Katie, right, my Katie, and she introduced me to copperplate calligraphy. She had taken a couple of workshops maybe a year prior. She saw that I was doing some lettering. She was like, hey, look, this is a calligraphy pen. Here's how you hold it. Wow, you suck at that. Because calligraphy is really hard. Anyway, but that showed me like the reasoning behind the fix and fins, classical typefaces. And then, I just kind of spiraled from there, started doing more lettering, started practicing broad nape calligraphy, which I think resonated with me a little more than flex nape calligraphy. And I started, I think in 2016, I want to say, was the first time I got paid money to draw a logo, $400, which is pretty good for a first logo.
Yeah, no, that's good. For a first timer.
Yeah. And then I started taking it a little more seriously and thinking like, maybe this really can be a living. And it wasn't for quite some time. I just kind of did it on the side while I was doing all these other things. Property management. I was a realtor for a year. That didn't go so well.
Wow. Deep cuts.
Yeah, that was not for me. But I did keep pursuing the whole lettering thing. And then in 2019, I decided to get a trial of Font Lab to just try to put together a real typeface. I'd already drawn some letters in Illustrator. I was like, I just got to try to take the next step here. It just made sense. And that's how my first typeface happened. One sheet. I think the design of it was pretty interesting. The technicalities behind it, like I had no idea how font engineering worked at all. So I did not have any kerning. It had so many technical issues. But, I could fire it up and kind of use it in Illustrator, and that was enough for me. So I put it on my website for $9. And then I made another typeface and another and another, and I started learning stuff. Yeah, here I am. I'm still learning stuff, to be honest.
That's amazing.
Design and font engineering that I don't know yet, but every typeface gets a little better.
That's amazing that your first typeface was in 2019 because your work is so refined and it looks like you've been doing this for decades.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess when you started delving into typeface design and realizing that was something you wanted to pursue, what sort of learning resources did you start tapping into? I mean, obviously part of it was just experiment and playing around, but were you taking any courses? Were you reading books? How did you learn the specifics?
Right. Never taken a course.
Wow.
Well, maybe I should.
That's
No.
insane.
Well, yeah, like it's blowing my mind that
I
you're.
just taught myself. Are
Yeah.
you a tinkerer? Like, do you just tinker with stuff?
I definitely tinker with stuff, yes. I love to tinker, I love to
Interesting.
sketch. I guess I am visually oriented. Gun Barber talks about the power of observation.
Yes.
Which basically means like you look at so much stuff and you memorize it. You have this library in your head of what letter forms could look like. And as you draw them, you start refining them more. You start realizing really exactly what they ought to look like. So yeah, I looked at an absolute ton of letters, and I do have a bunch of books as well. A lot of them secondhand. Got a couple of the Louis Philly classics, older books by like Jan Tschichold. Really any type book I could get my hands on, and I'd just be like browsing through it, staring at all the letters, trying to kind of just absorb them. And I guess to some degree that worked. It's a combination, I suppose, of consuming the letters as well as creating the letters, because I think you also learn a lot just by trying.
I'm really curious how you said, like, maybe I should take a class. So are there things that you feel like, I should probably, like, what specific things do you feel like, well, maybe I could be better at that? Or how do you keep learning? Is it just, do you always make time for play? Because if you want to get better and you're teaching yourself, you have to like really, whether it's education or just tinkering or whatever you want to call it, there's always something to learn, especially when you're in the design space where there's no like right or wrong. But the programs are always changing. So even with like Illustrator or Photoshop, I'm always 200 steps behind because there's always new features, but there's no wrong way to do it. So the way I do it might not be the fastest way, but it's not wrong. Or it might not be like the newest way to do it, but it's not wrong. And I love watching those tutorial videos of like, are you doing it this way? You should do it this way instead. But I also am like, my way is fine. So do you have like specific areas where you're like, I want to get better at this or more educated about this? And how do you make time for that on top of your workload?
Well, I can't say that I do a really good job making time for that. I think a lot of my learning has come from play and from doing. But I remember taking a guitar lesson in 2015 or something, where the teacher just very explicitly said, like, you're probably just spending all your time like noodling around, going through songs you already know. And that's fun, but really the way to learn is to just practice skills over and over and over again. And that's not fun, but that's how you learn the fastest. But the other side of that coin, I would say, is that if you're learning in a way that you're not enjoying, it's much harder to keep it up long term. So that's why I suppose I haven't taken too much action into actively trying to educate myself. Or when I do learn something new, there's usually some kind of motivation behind it. Like I really want to get better at Cyrillic. I'm quite familiar with the Latin alphabet, but the Cyrillic alphabet still has a lot of mysteries to me. I tried it for the first time in 2020. People who read Cyrillic or who design Cyrillic have pointed out on multiple occasions that it kind of sucks. My rendition of it, there's a lot wrong with it, which is fair. So I'm trying that again, and I would really like to take a Cyrillics class, for instance. And I'm feeling a drive to get better at that specific thing, so I think I can stay motivated and actually complete it and do a proper job at it rather than, stopping halfway through because I no longer am interested.
Would you try and do it for a client project, or would you just, when you have a free moment, kind of pick it up and be like, I'm going to play with this for a little bit?
Probably the latter.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But asterisk in that answer is that I'm just generally terrible at time management, so
okay. I don't
know.
You were great with your time management with us. You met all our deadlines and I think over-delivered. So I think you're okay at it.
Well, but and also you have a lot of typefaces out there, so you got to be doing something, right?
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Maybe.
Yeah. Stop dogging on yourself.
I feel like I don't properly manage a work-life balance. Like the classic freelancer dilemma of always feeling like you have to work, and then when you give yourself time off, still feeling like you have to work, but then when you're working, you might be like actually browsing Twitter instead and being like, I should just be taking.
Well, you're going to have a kid, so that'll fix everything. Actually, I do feel like I've talked about this before, and we don't talk a ton about it, but I feel like having a kid actually forced me into having, I don't really like when people say work-life balance. Like I get the phrase, but there's no such thing as balance. And it's really like finding the harmony between each of them. And I really like what you said earlier. It kind of made me think that you have a play first approach to your work, which is kind of the point of working for yourself as a creative. You want to play. You want to have fun and experiment. But then when you try and monetize it, you naturally have to do things that aren't play, like sell your work and work with clients. And it sounds like you have a good balance of both of those things. But then when I had kids, I had no choice but to stop at a certain hour of the day. And it's sort of just making your own boundaries of, I just in my head was thinking I should stop talking because this is 45 minutes of crap.
No. This is important.
Yeah, but I think I was kind of forced into like, okay, this is the 3 hour, because when they were really little, I had like some help, but primarily my son was home. Yeah. Luckily, he slept a lot, but I was like, okay, this is my power hour. Nothing else matters except getting this project done. And it made me really productive, helped me prioritize things. And I think for the first bit, I was working crazy hours, but then I was like, oh, I like literally can't keep up with this. I physically, emotionally, mentally. And so it helped me to sort of transition and figure out, okay, well, I could do this many hours. What's the like highest rate of return? And because you sell fonts, that's probably some passive income. I mean, ideally, that's a lot of passive income, but you also work with clients, right?
I do,
How do you manage? Do you like take on a certain number of clients a month? Just do whatever?
Yeah,
go with the flow?
To be honest, I just take as many clients as I can get my hands on, which past couple months to a year, I would even say, has been pretty slow. I feel like I've been hearing this from a lot of people in the industry.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. So I'm not currently juggling clients or anything. I do have a few projects that I'm working on that are going fine. Some illustration work, some monogram work. But generally, I don't have too hard of a time, making time for doing the retail typefaces. And that's also stuff that I'm always highly motivated for, or usually stuff that I'm highly motivated for, at least when I'm not kerning or something like that. So yeah, I guess this goes back to feeling like my time management skills aren't too great, because sometimes I'll even be working on a retail typeface when I feel like I should be working on something for a client instead. But yeah, as long as I'm meeting the deadlines, it really matter. They don't need to know. I hope they're not listening to this podcast.
Right. Well, and it's hard though, because we like our jobs. We chose this job. We're the boss. A lot of times we're solving our own problems instead of solving client problems, which is really rewarding. And the potential for passive income is obviously something a lot of artists are really interested in for good reason. I mean, it's wonderful. And so I think that guilt often comes from thinking, well, this is something for myself, or this isn't a client project. And when I started treating my own work, or the work that was more passive but wasn't urgent, it more like a client, I kind of felt better about it. I was like, my art licensing portfolio is my client, basically. And when I'm working on it, I'm pouring time into like a future investment. And that's hard because you have clients. And it's hard to shift between I'm doing this and then I'm doing that when one is more time sensitive. I use what do you call quadrants? That's a quadrant, right?
Mm-hmm. That is a quadrant. She's making a plus sign for those of you who can't see the visuals.
I use the urgent versus important quadrant like in my brain. I think it's kind of programmed into me now, where when I think about which thing to do first, and oftentimes Katie knows this very clearly, I want to do things that are low-hanging fruit first, and anything that's quick, I want to just get it out of the way, because I hate looking at a to-do list that is too long. And so if I can get the like little things that I have to do, the 5-minute things out of the way, and then have a whole block of time to focus on one of the big things, like chipping away at it, that works really well for me.
But the flip side of the coin is sometimes those little things pile up too much. And when we try to like approach things that way and like always do the low hanging fruit stuff, then there is no time to do the big things. And our big things keep pushing down and pushing down. So I just want to be realistic about what that actually looks like for us, because sometimes we nail it and sometimes we don't.
Right. Yeah. We've been doing little things that they add up, they inch us closer. But then Katie's right. Like at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I didn't even start on the big thing because I had so many little things.
I think that's like running a business in a nutshell, is you're just like the torrent of little things that rains down upon your head, and you have to figure out when it's time to do the little things and when it's time to do the big things, even though you do have some little things still on the list. It's hard to have some like bigger projects in the mix sometimes, for sure.
You got to break down the bigger thing into little things as well, right?
Yes,
Exactly.
That's exactly
Is your
right.
income split? Would you say it's 50-50 between font sales and client work?
No, I would say it's about 80-20 client work, font sales.
80% client work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, my font
Very
income
interesting.
Is, it's better every year. Yeah, certainly not enough to live on.
You're really intentional about how you sell your fonts, and you have a really interesting approach to licensing. And a question we always get is, which font license do I need, or how do I know which license? And I get why it's confusing to people. If you're on a third-party site, you're like, do I look at what the font designer says, or do I look at what this seller says? And then there's so many places to buy. And there's different pricing structures. Can you talk about how you've approached that and what maybe do some education on for people who are wanting to purchase fonts? I mean, I know I have hundreds and I could collect them all. I'm on a mission. Collect them all.
Well, of course, it's a very different perspective depending on which side of the font license you're on. So I have very different considerations as a person selling fonts.
Let's hear both sides. Yeah.
So I can start as a person selling fonts. So I didn't know very much about font licensing getting into this either. But I had heard a lot of people. I was hanging out on Type Drawers, which is an internet forum for people that draw type. Lovely little pun. Everybody there was saying stay away from the big distributors, specifically my fonts, because it is a downward spiral and there is so much work on there. It is really hard to get seen. And that kind of drives a race to the bottom where people are putting these giant 90% discounts on their fonts, which just undervalues everybody's work. It's hard to get found there. Half of your money goes to my fonts. Just not a good strategy. Maybe if you got on my fonts 20 years ago and you built a big library and you kind of got your name on there, my fonts will also probably promote your work more, then maybe it can be a good option. But generally, most people, most independent type foundries seem to recommend against that. And so I just kind of always kept that in mind. I never did join them. I did join FontSpring at one point. Early in my typeface career, I got a couple of typefaces on there. One of my reasons for that was that they had a higher cut. They gave 70%, kept 30%. But at some point, they got bought by Creative Market, and that cut went to 50-50 as well, at which point I pulled out from that. And I never made a lot of sales on there anyway. It was kind of a smaller distributor to begin with, and it kind of had the same problem as my fonts, I think, where there's just a very large forest, very hard for anybody to find your tree. So I just decided to sell them on my own, and I think I just copied a random font license from a bigger foundry. I don't even remember which one, but I probably shouldn't say it on here anyway. And just threw it on my Squarespace website where there wasn't really any choice between licensing types anyway. I didn't have the option to have product variants, so you could just buy my font as is, whole family, with a single license. I don't know if I even really understood my own license at that point, because it is complicated, and like now all of a sudden, besides being a typeface designer and a graphic designer, you're expected to be a contract lawyer as well. But I did start reading about it some more, and I started reading how other foundries did it. And this model was started, I think it was started by Dynamo, but was also used by folks like DJR and by Rutherford from Mass Driver and a whole bunch of people. And to some degree, I think this is starting to become the default model for indie foundries that are selling on their own websites, is the one-size-fits-all license. If you go to my fonts, or most font distributors, you have to select desktop license, web license, ebook license, whatever, and then select the amount of desktops that this is going to be installed on, or the amount of users that a website is going to have every month. Instead of that, you just have one license that generally tends to be based on company size, so the size of the company that will be using the font. That has different tiers, 1 to 5 users, 6 to 10 users, etc. And the price just goes up a little bit. As a way, first of all, to just simplify everything, which is good for both the foundry and for the user, and to still, by having that company size tier system, have some degree of value related to the usage of the font, because a bigger company is going to probably extract more money from their font than a single person would. And yeah, it also just makes it a lot simpler, because now you have one license that you're working with as the type foundry instead of all these different ones for different purposes. Downsides of this model, well, the first one would be, and this one's diminishing because more people are getting familiar with it, but the first downside is that a lot of people don't quite understand it yet because it's so new and they're just used to the traditional desktop model. Another downside is it's very general, and maybe for a customer this wouldn't be great because they would save money just getting a license for their very specific usage. Like, I only need this as a web font, but now I'm paying for desktop usage and ebook usage and whatever as well. because the one-size-fits-all license does tend to be a little more expensive than just a very basic desktop license, but it does cover a lot more usage, so it kind of makes sense. So that's what I'm using now, and I wrote it myself this time, and I'm pretty pleased with it, and my customers seem to be as well. Don't get too many questions, really. It seems to be pretty self-explanatory.
Have you ever had someone that you suspected was like didn't pick the proper license for how they're actually using the font or how many people are using the font? Have you ever had to like hunt anybody down, and what do you do in that circumstance? Like what legs can you really stand on and how do you approach that?
Well, it has happened to me several occasions, never on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody
Okay.
wants to break a font license. If they didn't care about that, they would probably just pirate it to begin with. But these are generally reputable companies that are trying to do things properly and by the books, and their designer just misread how the license works or something like that. And so every time that has happened, it's been very easy to solve. I just find out the person's email, contact them about it. Usually I'm paid within a few days.
What do you say in those kind of circumstances? I just want people to have some sort of like kind of understanding of a guideline of how to approach that. Because for me, that's like, I've never known how I would handle that. Because I mean, I'm not in the typeface world, but.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And of course, it does take a little bit of, assertiveness. But I try to be very polite. And I try to approach them also from the assumption that this is a mistake on their end and not intentional. So I'm definitely very friendly about it. And I say, I'm sure this was not on purpose. I try to say it kind of formally. But I do also say, like, this is a license violation.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, you're violating this license. And technically, that gives me grounds to sue you. Or I might not even
I might or might not sue you depending on how you respond to this email. Just putting that out there.
But it's important that in your license, it has very clear language about what the license does and does not cover. And that if the license is purchased under the wrong license tier for a company that needs a bigger license tier, it's not valid. So that way you do have, in fact, some legal ground to stand on. Now, would I actually go on and sue a large company? I probably don't have the resources to actually do that, but it's also never really gotten that far. And I think 99 out of 100 times it wouldn't.
I feel like it's got to be confusing to keep track of all that. Like that sounds like a lot of, I've seen some other type designers just, someone tags them in a product that they see. And so then they'd be like, I'm going to just double check if that license is the right, they're like, this is in a big box store. But how would you really know?
It's imperfect. And you're right. You can't catch it all.
That's like
I do
the
on
nature.
Occasion, yeah, it is. And you're within a business as well as within a society, you can operate on high trust or on low trust. You can assume that people have good intentions, or you can assume that people have bad intentions and face the consequences of either decision. But I believe that operating on high trust is easier on you, and it is easier on your customers, and that you build a good relationship with people, and that's enough. I can operate on low trust and try to internet stalk everybody that buys a license from me and make sure that the business that they bought it for isn't actually 11 people when they got the tier for 10 people. But that's time that I could be spending.
You better pay me for that person.
Or enjoying a Mardi Gras parade or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So
I
you just
feel
gotta
like
accept that.
I like that life philosophy.
Me too. And I don't know how common, it's so refreshing to hear you say that, because I see so many artists say things like, I'm too afraid to put my work out there. What if it gets stolen? And like, you've chosen to have high trust, but you've also understand that by putting yourself and your work out there on the internet, people are going to pirate it. People are going to get it for free. People are going to buy the wrong license.
And I do. And you can find all of my fonts on Russian torrent websites for sure.
Oh, man.
I'm not going to buy them there, by the way. I actually don't even
Well, you wouldn't have to buy it, right? Isn't that the whole thing?
Yeah. But I am so worried about downloading something that's going to break my computer, and that's expensive. So I'm not going to do that. Like, I'll pay the $50 or whatever.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, but
I go back to the days where I LimeWired every song on planet Earth when I was like 10, 12.
Right. I don't think that everyone has that attitude, though. I think people are really worried about copyright infringement. They're worried about someone. It's really funny, too, when, not funny, I get it. I totally get it. But when artists are at the beginning stages and they're so worried about someone copying their designs, but they haven't even really made any work yet. Right. When artists who are like renowned, whose work is on the opening page of Adobe Illustrator, their work is for sure influencing tons of people. I said this to someone the other day. I said, I'm pretty sure I saw someone copying your work. And she was like, yeah, I just laugh about it now. Because like nobody can do what she does because you're a full package. Like the reason people want to shop from you isn't just because of the style of your type. That's obviously a huge factor, but it's a whole package. And if they don't want to buy your font, they can go buy a different one, but it's not going to be the same. It's literally not going to be the same. And I think that attitude is a really healthy one to have. Do you ever question that? Or like, is it just the core of who you are, how you were raised, your attitude, or is it something you work on?
I think it kind of is, yeah. And you definitely see these two streams kind of conflicting with each other on type design forums and Twitter and all that. I'm certainly not the only people with this attitude. I think seeing other people say these things, like chasing people who illegally downloaded your fonts isn't worth your effort and everything like that, has calmed my nerves about it too and made me more confident in that this is the right approach.
What about subscription models? I know some sellers are like leaning more towards having like a bunch of typefaces available for like in a library where anybody who has a subscription to that particular service can access any of those fonts in the library and use them in their any kind of project, and they just get like kind of a blanket license to use all of it. And then a lot of times the font foundries who created those will be paid per usage, or I don't know if there's other ways that works, but how do you feel about that model for the type designers?
I don't think there's inherently anything wrong with it. I can also see how for a customer it would be very useful. I think it just depends on how the type designer is compensated and whether that is fair. For instance, everybody I know who is on Adobe fonts, which soon will include me, by the way. I'm going to
Yay!
Sometime in the next few months. Everybody raves about Adobe fonts. They think the compensation is fair.
Great.
It also leads to more high-end enterprise sales because the Adobe fonts license doesn't cover everything. So maybe a bigger company starts out on Adobe fonts using your typeface and then has to go to your website to buy the proper license. Everybody I know loves Adobe fonts. They do it right. Monotype recently went into the subscription model and circumvented kind of a lot of their own foundries that they work with and just kind of went behind their backs and changed the licensing on them. And made it so that, I'm not exactly sure because I'm not on my fonts, but you can read all this drama on typedrawers.com. Yeah, how they just really diminished the profits or got people into the subscription service without people really agreeing to that in the first place. So, yeah, it can be done right, and it also definitely can be done wrong.
Yeah, we definitely don't want it to end up like Spotify for type designers where they get 0.0000001 cent.
Right. I'm curious about, we know some type designers who also have their work on Creative Market. They have it on Font Squirrel, which I know is the same ownership company. They have them on Etsy, whereas like Etsy takes the smallest percentage because it's not a partnership. It's you have your own shop. You have your own shop, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm curious, would you ever recommend to someone to put it on all of those places? I mean, obviously, if you could get on Adobe and on your own site, that would be like, sounds really perfect. But I think a lot of people also get overwhelmed with where they should sell. And ultimately, I think I might say pick one and stick with it for now. Like, it's not that big of a deal to upload to a new site later, but it's overwhelming how many options there are.
Right. Well, I know it's a strategy in and of itself, which I haven't tried, so I can't recommend for or against it. But I know there's a lot of people who upload everywhere they can. They don't want to deal with any of the font licensing themselves. They just want to make a font, throw it on my fonts, FontSpring, whatever, anything they can throw it on, and just get as many distribution channels as possible, which does seem like a valid option because within all these websites, there are search bars, right? So the more platforms you have it on, the more sales you're probably going to make. So maybe not double as many, but say that having it on my fonts and on Creative Market gives you 150% of the sales that you would have had just on my fonts, then I mean, that seems like a valid option. But yeah, the other end of that coin is, of course, you completely abandon how you're going to sell your typefaces. Any control that you have over that, you give to a third party.
What are some considerations for the marketing of your typefaces? But when you're in the process of deciding what to even create, or as you're going along, like, are there things you're thinking about that will make the typeface sell better? Are you just going with what excites you the most? Are you like, I'm going to make a display face because I know my customers like mostly want this type of really like wonky, weird thing from me? Or are you thinking even about like SEO when you're like describing the qualities of it? Like, walk us through that a little bit.
Maybe I should if I want that 20/80 ratio to change. I mean, again, I work so much from what I want to make.
Yeah.
That's how it's always been. None of my typefaces have been created with the intention to make something that sells well. They've been created as something that I felt like creating, something that I had inside of me that I wanted to put out into the world. And I'd like to think that at least long term that'll be a good strategy, because this way I'm creating things that are uniquely me, and I can stay motivated to keep making them because
much less likely to burn out.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, I do take some considerations. Like, I made Thanatos, which is a display serif typeface, and I just realized, a text version of this would work well, and it would probably make this typeface more useful. I think usefulness is probably one thing that I look at. Like, I try to find ways to make even a weird display typeface more useful, and I try to really complete the character set and add a bunch of currency marks that probably will never be used, but I just want to make sure they're there in case.
Yeah, no, so appreciated by the one designer that's going to open it up and see the glyphs palette and just smile. Yes!
Yeah. Hell yeah, he included the manette.
He's getting niche.
Guy is really, really happy.
Yeah.
On that note, my understanding, I've made, 2 really awful, I use glyphs, but I also tried to make one on that, like one of those apps. I don't know. Don't even remember what it's called. But on that note, would you recommend someone wait until they feel like their font is ready? Or would you say release what you have, because you can update it so easily and send it out to everyone who's ever purchased?
Good question. To some degree, a font is never ready because there's always more you can be adding to it.
Right.
So, yeah, I've talked about that recently with other people, and I don't know if I quite have advice for myself. I feel a little less comfortable with like the future fonts kind of model where I would just release upper and lowercase and some numbers, and then, maybe a couple months from now I'll add some language support or something. And also updating is not that easy. I mean, it's not that hard either, but it would take me a few hours to set up all the files and resend everything. So it's not something I'm going to feel like doing, and I know that. I also know that I just like to put something out there and be done with it and just be able to move on to the next project.
So it's a personal kind of workflow.
I would say so, yeah.
It's funny you mentioned future fonts because the Hood Sisters, Hoodspa Design, did our logo rebrand, and they used a really beautiful font, and they showed it to us, and we fell in love with it on Future Fonts. I'll link to it because I can't remember his name, but it was so good.
Hex something.
Yeah, Hextype.
And it's called Margot. Hex what?
I'm saying Hextype, but now I'm not even sure if that's actually...
Yeah, his Instagram is like all pictures of pizza.
Yeah.
So we were like, is this the right dude? But yeah.
But there was no ampersand. Okay. And we were like, oh my gosh, because we use it a lot. And he released it this year and sent us a note. And he was like, I know you wanted this.
Yeah.
We could not have been more excited. I mean, we were so happy because for so long, anytime we were typing with it, we would have to either spell out and every designer loves.
It's Katie and Ilana, right?
Yeah, exactly. We were using it all the time.
I know, we had
out now.
We were like freaking jerks writing out and. Who does that?
What a waste of 2 letters.
What a waste of time when you could put a beautiful swirly little ampersand. Yeah, for people who don't know future fonts, it's a kind of interesting model where type designers are sort of putting their unfinished prototypes of typefaces. And I don't know if like people outside of the industry are really looking on future fonts, or if it's more of like a super niche, like if you know kind of thing. What do you think, Matthijs?
I don't know if they're super well known, but I think they've got some degree of popularity. I've submitted a few fonts to them, but they review everything, and they're kind of strict. They rejected 2 of my types.
Oh, wow.
How dare they?
How could they reject you?
At this point, I was saying I'm not even sure if I really want to go with that model anymore, but yeah, it's not for everybody.
We just have a few more minutes, but I just was curious if you could talk about how you got onto Adobe, if you're willing to talk about that, just like, because I know that's like a goal for a lot of type designers to get their fonts onto Adobe. So did they like scope you out and reach out to you? Did you reach out to them? How did that go down?
I don't think they scope out anybody. I think they're very overwhelmed. I think it's a fairly small team, the Adobe Fonts team. I tried to get through to them several times, and they were always like, we're not taking anybody. We're not taking anything new right now. The way that I'm managing to get on it is I am actually starting to work with a distributor, Type Network, which is a very small-scale high-end distributors, kind of how they market themselves.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that kind of thing exists, like an agent distributor kind of thing.
Yeah, they are basically an agent, and they have
Interesting.
connections to Adobe fonts, and through them I'm getting Adobe fonts as well. And I'm also selling some of my typefaces on their website just directly under the more traditional desktop, web, etc. license, which I figured might be a good idea anyway, because there might be a market for people who don't want to buy into my one-size-fits-all license, so that way I can cover both those bases. And yeah, it got me into Adobe fonts, so. One
That's
thing
so
I will say
interesting.
about getting into Adobe fonts is they have pretty high quality assurance. A tool that I've started using now is Font Bakery, which is developed open source by Google, and you can use it to kind of check a typeface. You use it for the command prompt. You check a typeface for all these little errors and all these little inconsistencies and tons of little things that I had no idea even were requirements in fonts, or at least technically recommended specifications. Just little check boxes and how to set up your vertical metrics and a bunch of technical stuff that I've recently learned about. Because yeah, Adobe Fonts wants to make sure that your stuff is A+. Not even so much in the design aspects of it, but just in the technical font engineering behind it. It has to be very good.
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Gosh, this conversation has been great. We have to sadly wrap it up. Can you tell the people where they can find you, what you're working on? Yeah. Tell them how to get in touch.
Yeah.
All the things.
I run the Herzberg Design Co., which sounds a lot more impressive. It's just me. But if you say it's a design co.
Yeah. We love a we around here.
Exactly.
A fake we.
Pretend, yeah,
A fake we.
So we run the Herzberg Design Co. Which you can find on herzbergdesign.com or on Instagram. I think it's just Herzberg Design.
It is, I checked.
We'll put it in the show notes for sure.
Obviously,
and we're working on something. I am working on a typeface I'm really excited about. I don't know if we have time to get into that, but it's an Art Nouveau left-handed typeface. It's going to be out somewhere in the next few months. It's going to be called Mancine, after my wife's last name. She's also left-handed.
Well, that sounds dreamy as heck.
Did you say left-handed typeface?
Yes, it's a left-handed typeface, meaning that, have you ever done broad nib calligraphy?
Yes.
Okay, so you know how the angle of your pen is generally around 30 degrees. Lefties have a really hard time writing at that angle.
Yes.
They have to are you guys left-handed perchance?
No, my husband and my daughter are.
Okay, so if they ever wanted to try any of our traditional Latin scripts, like foundational hand or black letter, they'd either have to angle their paper at 90 degrees or they have to write with this awkward hook, not to mention that they're going to be smearing the ink the whole time.
Exactly.
So Phaedra Charles, who is also a type designer, several years ago...
The Molly Duker one?
Yeah. Came out with the Sinistral hand, which is a calligraphic script meant to be written with the left hand at an angle of about 150 degrees, I believe, or maybe 120 degrees was hers. And that really inspired me. I really like the idea of it because it also just opens up some really weird letter forms that I think have not been explored much at all, at least within the Latin alphabet. And so, yeah, I've been trying for a very long time to put my own spin on that. I've settled at this kind of strange, very unique looking, I've been trying to put an Art Nouveau spin on it, and it's still got the calligraphic flair. It's going to have a couple of weights. It's got these really wild, washy capitals, and then it also has a simplified uppercase if you want to write in all caps. And yeah, you'll see it.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so great. Yeah,
Cannot wait.
If that's out by the time that this episode comes out, it will be linked in the show notes for sure.
I can't promise
Thank
that.
you so much, Matthijs. We had such a good time chatting with you, and thanks again for giving us the coolest type logo ever for our Typecast. That's what this thing is called, right?
Of course. Yeah,
I was like, what is our podcast name again?
Thanks so much for having me draw your logo. That was a lot of fun.
Yay!
Amazing.
Pleasure talking to you. I got a lot of good advice from you as well, honestly. So.
Oh, amazing.
It wasn't 45 minutes of crap?
I don't think so, but that's up to the listeners.
Yeah, that's up to you. Rate and review.
Yeah. You heard it here first. All right. All good things.